What is the most insane documentary you've ever seen? 007100 said. Grizzly Man by Verner Herzog. It's a documentary about Timothy Treadwell, an environmentalist who spent 13 summers in Alaska camping out with grizzly bears and eventually gets eaten along with his girlfriend. And it was caught on tape, because he filmed everything. Dude was clearly not all there, just a sad story, but fascinating. R0F1M0S3 said. Treadwell was unmediated bipolar. He made what he knew was a risky decision and 2 lives were lost over it. He knew he was staying too late in the season but stayed away. It always struck me as so deeply tragic because it could have been avoided. Kurtz Lefkenverse said. Tell Me Who I Am was the most heartbreaking documentary I've ever seen. It's about these twin brothers and one of them gets into a bad motorcycle accident when he was 18 and doesn't remember anything from before. His brother has to decide whether to tell him everything or let him live in ignorant bliss. Rat Teeth said. I don't think anyone ever really thought that. The main exposure that outsiders had to it was through their recruitment tactics, which were bizarre enough to cause the documentarians to look into it. Ada, in case you haven't seen the documentary, it isn't about people having a weird fetish, it's about people using their money and influence and threats to entrap young men into submitting to their abuse. The Trilogy 182 said. Imposter. It's the story of this kid who went missing when he was 12 or 13 and then reappeared something like 10 years later. It documents him getting back to and reuniting with his family. But get this, it wasn't the actual missing kid, but instead a French scam artist who did this shit serially. Now what makes the doc crazy is the story is told with interviews from the family and the fucking scam artist. He obviously a sociopath, so he just calmly explains his motives and justifications for getting this poor family's hopes up. There's footage of all this as well as reenactments with the guy. It's super creepy. Princess Corncob said. I went into this blind, after watching a late-night TV host and a guest talking about it. In my humble opinion, it's a documentary unlike the many others I've watched. The subject matter is similar, the emotion behind it sets it apart. I was devastated for the last 40 minutes of the documentary. There are few things I watched that affect me to the point of sobbing. The sense of grief and rage I felt was almost overwhelming, yet I was compelled to finish the documentary. For reference, I watched What Happened to Aunt Diane. That doc is also massively fucked up. I cried, I raged. Dear Zachary hit me deeper. Dear Zachary didn't leave me feeling hopeless. The 2 people, featured at the end of the doc, actually made me feel a little better. They're exemplary people. The maker and director also did a fantastic job. As heart-wrenching as this documentary is, I think more docs regarding this subject matter should strive to have the same heart and soul as this one did. Search Windows said. Young vibrant American doctor and only child of elderly parents living in the UK is shot and killed by his crazy girlfriend he was trying to break up with. His parents were planning on seeking justice for him and then killing themselves since their only child is dead. Find out she is pregnant. Find out she is Canadian and extradition is all messed up. Documentary filmmaker is his best friend and wants his unborn son to know about his dad, so he makes a film included stories from all close to his dad. Andrew was an amazing man with many friends and relatives who loved them dearly. The story is told in a way that halfway through you feel like you knew him too or would have liked to. She has the baby. Grandparents move there to take care of baby Zachary. She is released on bail. 3/4 of the way through she kills herself and 13-month-old Zachary. We get reactions from all the people who told us about Andrew. You will be gutted and ripped apart by how raw and brutal this part of the documentary is. Especially reaction from Andrew's father. Grandparents now fight for victims' rights and thankfully have not killed themselves. Fishfingerkipian said. Selling Sex by Louis Theroux wasn't exactly insane, but it was heartbreaking and has stuck with me. One girl said she had a good relationship with her pimp. He was cool and he respected her. I think she even said he loved her. They were pictured at one point walking down the street like a loving couple. During an interview with her, she found she had lost her night's money and became almost hysterical with fear of the extremely severe beating she was going to get from him. Another had to work all night and then was driven somewhere else to work all day. She was allowed 2 hours in between during which she could choose between eating and sleeping. So many vulnerable girls preyed on and tricked into prostitution by psychological and emotional manipulation and kept there by violence. Many said their pimp loved, respected and took care of them. He must do because he bought her haircuts, nails and tans, obviously making the merchandise more sellable. They had a pimps ball where all the local pimps showed off their girls by parading them single file and they weren't allowed to look up, like a slave market. Low Pressure 325 said, "My partner and I have watched The Woman Who Wasn't There about 10 times. It's fascinating. You will question the motivation of human beings ad infinitum. So many quotable lines. No, Tanya. I don't think they're gonna care if you're not a US citizen. Everyone in Tanya's story dies, but not that firefighter. Tanya. Do you or do you not have a dog?" Low Pressure 325 said, "You said it. She lied about the most minute things for no reason. Here's another. Lupe is walking him," she said. "That dog must really love Lupe." When I first heard Tanya's story, I was waiting to hear she had written a book and made a lot of money off of it or somehow stood to gain something material for her deceit. But, as we all know, there was no profit motive and she was just a liar. She ended up disgraced just as her father had been. What an amazing story, and what a force of nature is Tanya had. I wonder what she is doing now. Dum Dum Gimme Yum Yum said, "Class Action Park. It's about this old amusement park in New Jersey called Action Park that had an insane number of injuries. Former employees and guests talk about each ride and what made it fun and unsafe. There are animations of people getting hurt, so these parts are too hard to watch. It also includes interviews about a specific fatality, so I do want to make that clear as a trigger warning. But mostly it's a fascinating look at how kids grew up in the 80s and 90s and whether that was the best thing. There's a lot of nostalgia, but I don't think anyone wants their kid to be the one who's fatally electrocuted on a kayak ride." Sean77 said, "After watching that documentary, my coworker and I always used to play out that conversation on each other randomly on the way to lunch. So my wife has been a little more ball than chain lately. You think you could help me out? Hope far, have you ever gone to help a friend out?" And so on. We were fascinated on how the real conversation went. How in the world did he get that guy to jerk him off? It was such a mystery. And how was it after he finished? There's some napkins in the glove box. You mind grabbing them for me? So many questions. Wilbur94 said, "Only the Dead is a documentary about Iraq, produced by an Australian journalist during the war. He got an inside look at the insurgency, the jihadists, and how Iraq became a nightmare over time. Some of the footage is incredibly graphic." Another was called Brian on the Boulevard, which was a documentary about a Malay prostitute in Los Angeles whilst also being addicted to drugs. It was so honest and so haunting to see. I don't recommend either if you want to feel good about humanity, but if you are fascinated by such grim facts of life, they are indeed insane and unbelievable to watch. Lidrasibov said, "Operation Odessa. It's a documentary about this group of guys who managed to obtain and sell military equipment from the collapsed USSR to Cuba from Florida, among other things. It's fascinating and hilarious, but also shockingly all true. The name actually comes from the name of the DIA operation that brought them down. One of them managed to get away, but they secured an interview with him in an undisclosed location on the documentary." Redreen17 said, "I couldn't finish this. Actually couldn't make it very far through. And not just because of how horrifying the events were, it was a lot of the people interviewed. Clearly the mother and her boyfriend were responsible for killing and torturing the little boy. Since they did it. But he was also let down by so many people. And some of those people were witnesses in the trial or interviewed, and it felt like they seemed smug instead of mournful. Sad. Bothered." Moose Baloney said, "As a father of 2 young daughters, I got to the part where he described loading the dead mother in the cab of the truck with the 2 daughters and was 100% donezo. I didn't even get to the most disturbing part of what he did to the girls. That dude deserves an extra special place in the eternal abyss. The worst part is he could have just left. Just straight up move in with the other woman and call it that." Lady Blythe said, "There's an excellent documentary on an incident during the Troubles in Northern Ireland called No Stone Unturned. It's an investigative journalism piece about British forces' collusion and cover-up of the 1994 Lowenisland massacre, when 6 people in a bar watching Ireland play in the World Cup were murdered by masked paramilitary gunmen with assault rifles. The methodical, step-by-step investigation and laying out of the very incriminating evidence makes for a truly fascinating watch." Two of the filmmakers were later arrested by the PSNI and then released. Not an easy watch, but highly recommend it. It's Raul said. I remember that being showed in schools. At the time I just thought eating McDonald's every day would be unhealthy. As a more fit older guy, yeah, you eat a fuckload of calories a day and pick the most calorie-dense meals on the menu with desserts included, you gonna gain weight. Shit don't matter if it's from McDonald's either. The documentary treated it as if McDonald's wants to fatten us up for slaughter. Reality is it's just a movie of a guy who has no idea how to portion control. Anyone would get fat on a surplus. Satterer said. Lance Houdet was about Lufthansa Flight 181 which was hijacked in 1977. The plane made a big odyssey and the pilot of the plane risked, and lost, his life for his passengers. In the end, the plane got stormed by GSG-9 police units on their first mission, except the captain of the plane who was shot days earlier and 3 of 4 hijackers. Everybody survived. The documentary made a very interesting mix of interviews, including with the one surviving hijacker, documentary explanations of the background decisions and some scenes played by actors. Quiet Vincent said. Those awful Hitler Nazi Germany documentaries they played on the History Channel all through the 90s zeros. You know the ones, Hitler and the Occult, the case for Hitler being a gay man, ancient aliens in contact with Hitler, that fucking Bell time machine thing, the series where people try to prove that Hitler escaped to Argentina under a fake identity, it just goes on. All of them are complete and utter garbage. World said. I'm not a big documentary person but the trials of Gabriel Fernandez just really messed me up. That poor kid went through so much shit and CPS did nothing about it after multiple reports. I'm hoping that his mother and her boyfriend have the worst possible treatment for the rest of their lives, like how they treated him. Also the CPS people who didn't do anything, they need to seriously re-evaluate themselves. Deadite Queen said. Children of the Secret State. It's a document on North Korea during the massive famine that took the lives of millions in the late 1990s through mid-2000s. It was not what I expected, to say the least. Please be warned, I'm gonna mention some very messed up stuff that includes cannibalism and child murder. So this documentary was made with the help of an NK journalist who would capture footage, in secret with hidden cams, and then smuggle it out to the other filmmakers via China. The famine was so immense that the woods and forests of NK were silent, as everything including insects were being picked clean by citizens. Children who were orphaned at this time got the absolute worst of it. The film shows footage and stills of blonde NK kids, so malnourished their hair lost pigment. Their fate was the worst. The govt constructed cement buildings with no windows and only a single door. Once the building was full they would break up the door and simply wait for them to die so the building could be cleaned out for the next batch. There were reports of teeth marks and signs children had attempted to consume the dead while sealed in. Many young children who were smuggled out to China, and onto SK, during this era were given psychological counseling. Many told stories of Malay family members killing themselves with the instruction that their bodies be butchered and fed to the family. Some even drew pictures of human limbs being sold at markets, like a chunk of fresh pork might be. The Red Cross attempted to aid the situation but all their aid drops were confiscated by the government and sold to the wealthy elite of NK. The whole situation was beyond words. Cody Pupster said. Finders keepers. A man loses his foot in a small plane accident that also kills his father. He has some PTSD issues that kind of center around this severed foot, which he keeps and stores in a smoker and a storage unit. At some point he stops making payments on the unit and this other man buys the unit at auction. He discovers the foot in the smoker and decides it is going to make him famous. There's a full-on custody battle for this foot and it is just so sad on both sides. It's one of those things, it is such a ridiculous premise you start laughing about it, but then realize those are real people, real damaged people. Errant Knight said. Wings of Hope by Verner Herzog about a plane crash where only one teenager survived. He had been booked on the plane but didn't end up taking it. The woman is a complete badass, trekked through the jungle alone past snakes and crocodiles with all kinds of injuries including broken collarbone. Poured kerosene on her wounds to kill maggots. She still lives there studying bats. She went with the documentary crew to find where the crash happened. Something weird that stuck with me was her complete and total disregard for insects. Middle of the jungle, constantly being harassed by mosquitoes and flies. No flinching, no swatting, just sits there. Lurker 1969 said. The Ivory Tower. Watched it before sending our daughter to college. It's about how the universities and colleges in the US spend sick amounts of money on fun stuff, health clubs, swimming pools, and all sorts of playtime crap to attract the young students, and how little they invest into academics. This results in very bloated tuition costs and lesser education than in the previous time before about 2000. It's a must-see for parents about to dump way too much money into today's secondary education system. I am all for higher education done right. My brother is a manager at a prominent university in Washington state, and the amount of wasted money is sickening. Choose carefully for the best return. Motorwave Media said. Less of a pure documentary and more of a docudrama. HBO's Chernobyl was a hell of a ride. Everything is just so crisp, from the acting, they really know how to make you hate or love a character, to the awesome storytelling and getting their facts straight. The sets are amazing and really capture everything perfectly. There was so many scenes where I was just in awe, like when the firefighters arrive to the reactor fire and the one firefighter picks up the graphite rod tip that was shot out of the core, and his hand starts melting off later, or when the nuclear workers are staring into the hole that was once the core and it looks like the gates of hell have opened wide and there is green radioactive fire as the melted down uranium burns its way into the earth. Or when the Soviet general offers to go in instead of sending some of his soldiers. It's just so well put together, it's easily a masterpiece of the modern era. TLDR, HBO's Chernobyl. Not great, not terrible. Steven 8786 said. There's a documentary called Hardcore which is about the hardcore porn industry. There's a British girl who's trying to make it in the industry in America and goes to meet Max Hardcore. A scene that's always stuck with me is when she meets him for the first time. Her dad is with her, and he essentially fucks her in front of her father and the documentary crew to basically test her out. It always sends shivers down my spine thinking of that. Rip Granto said. KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov talking about Soviet active measures against the West in 1984. He pretty much predicted the state of the West by 2020. Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you can do, all Americans needs to do is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes and they can see. There is no mystery. It has nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage and intelligence gathering looks more romantic, it sells more to the audience through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and the opinion of the many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is, to change the perception of reality, of every American, to such an extent that despite an abundance of information no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their family, their community and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow and is divided into 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years required to educate a generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. Quotation mark. Mortars Elite said. Worst documentary I've ever seen is a German one on how video games are all being abused by neo-Nazis. It was published by a public tax-based media outlet, which makes it even worse. Basically they found one right extremist who made some dumbass 2D video game and a bunch of anti-Semitic Steam usernames. So obviously they concluded that it must be a widespread problem. They even had interviews with streamers talking about stuff like that in their chat. However, it unsurprisingly turned out that they had cut out all the parts where the streamers told them how it's a total non-issue and that there are report functions built into basically every platform. Funniest of all was them acknowledging that they had been completely wrong about violent video games causing violence a few years earlier, just to reaffirm their belief in the neo-Nazi gaming theory in the next sentence. Oh, and also they recreated some sexist discussion by showing someone beating a woman in GTA V. This is the video, in case someone is curious. It has a much deserved 2 to 60 like-dislike ratio. Falspector said. Child of Rage. I watched it on YouTube back when I was in my early mid-teens and it left me pretty speechless. Her and her brother were neglected by their birth parents. It was so extensive that the back of her brother's head was flat because he was laid on his back in his crib like 24/7. He was a baby at the time. When they were placed with their adoptive parents, she had to have a lock on her bedroom door because they were scared she would kill them. She had killed baby birds that she found in a nest in the backyard by throwing them against the wall. The little girl was sexually abused, and so when her adoptive parents had her, they found that she would rub her privates until they were raw. She would do this in the living room, the car, but also out in public such as the store. They also caught her in her bedroom with her younger brother, no more than 2 at that point, and she was sticking her finger up his ass. They asked her if he told her no stop. She said yes, so they asked why she didn't, and she answered something to the effect of "I didn't care." Equals not 100% sure that's accurate due to how long it's been since I've watched it.